The scent of pine and roasting chestnuts filled the air as Arda stepped off the minibus and onto the dusty road leading into the village. It was early June 2024, just as spring surrendered to summer in the Anatolian highlands. Above him, mountains framed the sky in deep blues and greens. Below, the valley unfurled like a quilt of terraces and orchards. He tightened his grip on the canvas, bag slung over his shoulder. Inside were scripts scribbled with his handwriting, character notes, and a small book of poems his grandmother had given him for luck. Arda had grown up near the sea in Izmir, making shadow puppets on his bedroom wall with a flashlight when other boys played football. His parents loved him, but never understood why he chose drama school over engineering. "There's no future in pretending," his father had said, when Arda announced his acceptance into the conservatory. Determined to prove he could forge his own path, he had taken every role offered villager. Lover soldier on small stages across Turkey. When a fellow actor told him about the Kaskiller Culture Fest, held in a remote mountain village known for its folk dance and epic storytelling, Arda knew he had to be there. The festival promised not only an audience thirsty for stories, but also workshops with elders who still remembered the old ways. Villagers greeted him with curious smiles as he walked past stone houses adorned with geraniums. Strings of colorful lanterns hung from eaves, ready for the nights to come. At the main square, a banner painted in bright letters fluttered. Hogeldenis, Kaskiller Kultur Festivala. Musicians tuned their baglamus under a sycamore tree. Women laid out embroidered linens and jars of honey on tables. A group of children rehearsed a stick dance, their laughter echoing against the mountain walls. "You must be Arda," a voice called. Arda turned to see a tall man with a camera slung around his neck. He wore rolled-up sleeves, his dark hair pulled into a bun, and his smile was easy. "I'm Danes," he said, offering his hand. "I'm filming the festival for a documentary. Mutor told me to look out for the actor from Izmir. They don't get many outsiders here." Arda shook his hand, feeling calluses from holding equipment. "It's my first time this far inland," he admitted. "I'm used to gulls and sea spray." He gestured to the mountains. "Feels like another world." "You'll get used to it," Danes replied. At night, the stars look close enough to touch. "I grew up in Ankara, but my grandparents are from the next valley over. Spent every summer here. When I was 10, I filmed my cousins performing the Halley with my father's camcorder. Now I'm making a film about why we gather like this, what these traditions mean to young people." They walked together to the community center where performers registered and volunteers assigned sleeping quarters. Inside, long tables were laden with steaming plates of bulgur pilaf, vine leaves stuffed with herbs and bowls of yogurt. Arda found a seat across from a group of elderly men in flat caps debating the merits of different love ballads. Danes set his camera down and joined him. "Do you always document festivals?" Arda asked between bites of pilaf. Danes shrugged. "Studied journalism, but news assignments wear you down. Last year I was sent to cover floods in the Black Sea region, then protests in Istanbul. When my aunt invited me back here, I realized how much I miss stories that heal instead of hurt. This documentary is my own project. No network, no editor telling me what angle to push." Arda envied his autonomy. "My parents still think theater is a hobby," he admitted. "I came here because I heard their essay workshop with a meta one of the last traditional storytellers. I want to learn how to hold an audience with just words and a handkerchief." "That's tomorrow afternoon," Danes said. "I'll be filming it. Maybe I can catch a performance too." "If you don't fall asleep halfway through," Arda joked, though nerves fluttered in his stomach. He had adapted a story from an old Anatolian epic into a one-man play. He'd spent weeks memorizing lines and practicing gestures, but performing in a village square, under the scrutiny of elders who knew the tale by heart, was daunting. They spent the afternoon helping volunteers decorate the square. Children tied ribbons to the poles of a makeshift stage, while a group of teenagers tested the sound system. As Arda climbed a ladder to hang lanterns, he glanced down and saw Danes adjusting his camera settings. The way he focused, body still, brow furrowed, eyes following light, reminded Arda of himself studying a script. There was an intensity there, but also a softness when he laughed with the villagers. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and golden light bathed the valley, the festival opened with a procession. Dancers in colorful costumes twirled, wooden spoons clacking rhythmically. Elders recited poems to the beat of drums. Arda sat beside Danes on a bench at the edge of the square. When the first musician began to sing an ancient ballad about forbidden love, Arda felt a lump in his throat. The singer's voice wove longing and joy together. He wondered how many young men had listened to this song and imagined lives beyond their villages. Later, as stars crowded the sky, villagers gathered around bonfires to roast chestnuts and share stories. A mustachioed man regaled the crowd with a tale about a shepherd who outsmarted a greedy bay. Children listened wide-eyed, their faces lit by flames. Arda sipped hot tea from a tulip-shaped glass and leaned back. Danny sat cross-legged nearby, his camera forgotten for once. Their shoulders brushed occasionally as they shifted, the contact sending small sparks through Arda. He chastised himself. He had come to perform, not to get distracted by a handsome filmmaker. "It feels like time slows down here," Danes murmured, watching the flames dance. "In the city everything is urgent. Here, you can breathe." "Do you ever think about staying?" Arda asked. "Making films about shepherds and spoon dances instead of protests?" Danes hesitated. "I want to, but my parents don't understand why I'd turn down a salaried job. To them, staying means stagnation. They worked hard to leave village life behind. Coming back feels like admitting failure." Arda nodded. He understood the tension between honoring tradition and pursuing new paths. "Maybe we're both between worlds," he said quietly, "pulled by where we come from and where we want to go." Danes looked at him then, and the firelight reflected in his eyes. "Maybe that's why we're here," he replied. "To find our own path, even if it means walking between worlds." The next afternoon, Arda attended the meta workshop held in the courtyard of an old stone house. The storyteller, an elderly man with a crisp white mustache, told them that a true tale was a bridge. "Your job is to carry listeners across," he said, waving his handkerchief like a flag. "You must know where to pause, where to whisper. You must know when to make them laugh and when to make them cry." Arda practiced under the master's guidance, learning to modulate his voice and use silences. When he glanced at the back of the crowd, he saw Danes filming, a faint smile on his lips. After the workshop, Danes approached, camera lowered. "You have presence," he said. "Even before you speak, people look at you. Don't let self-doubt steal that. It's easy for you to say," Arda replied, though his cheeks warmed. "You hide behind a camera." Danes laughed. "Sometimes a lens is a shield, but it can also be a mirror." He hesitated. "Do you mind if I filmed your performance tomorrow? I think your story could be the emotional center of my film." Arda swallowed his nerves and agreed. "Promise you'll cut if I trip over my words." That night, as final rehearsals echoed across the village and mothers coaxed children to bed, Arda sat by himself on a low stone wall, reciting his lines to the moon. The script told of a young man who defied his father to seek wisdom from a dervish. Along the way, he encountered tests of patience, generosity, and bravery. The story mirrored his own journey more than he'd realized. He imagined his father watching and hoped, foolishly perhaps, that the tale might travel back to Izmir somehow. Footsteps approached. Arda turned to see Danes carrying 2 mugs of steaming salop. He handed one to Arda and sat beside him. "For your nerves," he said, blowing on his drink. They sipped in silence for a while. The night air was cool, scented with pine and distant smoke. Crickets provided a steady rhythm. "Were you ever scared to tell your parents who you are?" Arda asked suddenly, surprising himself. "Not just about work," but he gestured vaguely, the word stuck on his tongue. Dennis's expression softened. "That I like men?" he finished gently. "I was terrified. I'm the eldest son. Expectations are heavy." When I told them, there were tears, questions, even silence. It took time, but they chose me over their fear of what neighbors might say. We're still learning together. Some days are hard. But I couldn't live hiding. Arda swallowed. He had never said the words out loud to his own parents. They suspected, he thought, but silence had been the pact between them. "I haven't told mine," he confessed. "I left home partly because I couldn't imagine both things being true, that I could be their son and be myself." Danes reached over his hand warm on Arda's knee. "Your story isn't finished," he said. "You get to write it. You don't have to do it alone." The next day, the square filled early. Villagers and visitors took seats on hay bales. Colorful scarves flapped in the breeze. Children balanced on stones to see better. Arda waited backstage, a patch of dirt behind a curtain of woven kilims, heart pounding. He wore simple clothes, a vest over a linen shirt, a sash around his waist. Danes adjusted his camera on a tripod, gave him a thumbs up, and mouthed, "Breathe." When the announcer called his name, Arda stepped onto the stage, handkerchief in one hand, heart in the other. He looked at the sea of faces and saw curiosity, expectation, kindness. He began Bur Varmus, Bur Yokomak. He told of the young man who challenged fate, who crossed mountains and deserts, who listened to sages and thieves. He changed his voice for each character. He paused to let laughter ripple, to let sadness settle. He saw children lean forward, elders nod, Dennis's gaze steady behind the lens. As he reached the tale's climax, the moment when the son returns and kneels before his father, both men weeping, Arda's voice trembled. He thought of his own father, of unspoken words, of promises he hoped one day to keep. When he finished, the square erupted in applause. Women ululated, men clapped their hands. The meta approached and placed his hand on Arda's shoulder. "You carried them well," he said simply. Afterwards, as people dispersed for lunch, Arda slipped behind the community center to catch his breath. His hands still shook with adrenaline. He sat on a wooden crate, staring at the dirt floor, until a shadow fell across him. It was Danes. He set the camera down and opened his arms. Arda stood, and they embraced, the hug strong and anchor-like. For a moment, the world narrowed to the warmth of Dennis's shirt and the steady beating of his heart. "You were incredible," Danes whispered. "I forgot I was filming." Arda laughed shakily. "My legs disagree. They still feel like jelly." They sat together, shoulders touching. Danes showed him a short clip on the camera's screen, Arda's face, lit by lanterns, as he spoke, eyes bright. "You see," Danes said, "that's you. It's not the doubts, not your father's voice. You." They spent the afternoon wandering through the stalls. A woman pressed them to taste her homemade pekmez. An elderly man insisted they try his pickle juice. Children pulled them into a ring dance, their small hands sticky with grape molasses. As the sun set, Arda and Danes climbed a hill overlooking the village. Below them, lanterns flickered like fireflies. The call to prayer floated from the mosque's minaret, mingling with laughter. "I don't know what happens next," Arda admitted softly. "Tomorrow, we pack up and go back to our cities. I'll audition, maybe wait tables. You'll edit hours of footage. We'll send texts that get buried in feeds. Maybe we'll drift like all the other almosts in my life." Danes took his hand, interlacing their fingers. "It doesn't have to be an almost," he said. "We can call, we can visit. We can choose to make space for each other. It might be messy. Our families might not understand. But I'd rather try than wonder what if." Arda looked at their joined hands, then at Dennis's face, the stubble on his jaw, the earnestness in his eyes. He thought of the story he'd told, of the courage it took for the son to return home and speak his truth. He squeezed Dennis's hand. "Okay," he said. "Let's write the next chapter." They leaned in, foreheads touching. The breeze carried the scent of pine and hearth smoke. When their lips met, it was gentle at first, then sure, like a promise. The mountains stood witness, ancient and steady. Lanterns glowed below, and somewhere a child practiced a drum rhythm, heartbeat-like. In the years that followed, Arda's play about the festival toured small theaters. Dennis's documentary screened at film clubs. They visited each other between shoots and rehearsals, meeting in Ankara, Izmir, and occasionally back in the valley where lanterns still hung in June. Their families asked questions, some uncomfortable, but gradually walls softened. Arda's father attended a performance and wept, later pulling his son into an embrace outside the theater. "My boy is a meta," he said proudly. Whenever life in the city felt too loud, Arda and Danes would return to the mountains. They'd sit on that same hill, watching the village lights wink on. They'd remember the festival that changed everything, the week when a camera and a story crossed paths. When two young men walked between worlds and chose each other. At a later festival, an elder approached them, handing Arda a handkerchief like the one he'd used years before. "Carry our stories forward," he said. Arda nodded, looking at Danes, who captured the moment on film. "We will," Arda replied. "Together,